A lot of people seem to like the video I did where I drew Sodor's loaned engines such as 98462 and 87546. At the end of that video I alluded to a potential part 2, where I draw some more background engines. I think now is as good a time as any to make that video, so it's time for me to start drawing. In my previous video on Sodor's loaned engines, many people pointed out that the green engine in Edward's Day Out would count as an unknown engine. This is because Edward's Day Out canonically takes place between the sad story of Henry and Edward Gordon and Henry, meaning that this engine can't be Henry because he's still bricked up in the tunnel. Obviously, C. Reginald Dalby, and William Middleton before him, drew this engine intending it to be Henry despite this inaccuracy, much like how Alaric appears in Coldie's flashback, or how Stanley appears in Bulldog, despite the fact that neither of them should exist at those points in the timeline. Though in this case it's hard to say whether it's an illustration error, since we don't know if Audrey had planned out the timeline at this point. Either way, this engine can't be Henry if we're going by the lore of the books, and so I need to figure out who this mystery engine is. Given their similarity to Henry, I've decided to base them on a certain other one-off Green Pacific locomotive with performance issues. My idea is that after Henry got shut up in the tunnel, the fat director needed a new engine, so he called up an old friend. The lore books reveal that, before coming to Sodor, Sir Topham Hatt worked at Swindon alongside Sir William Stanier. In the early 1920s, when the Three Railway Engines is set, Stanier was the Swindon Works manager. So let's say Topham rang him up and asked him if he could find a way to let him borrow an engine from the Great Western Railway. Stanier agreed, but either due to a communication error or a lack of available engines, the locomotive that ended up on Sodor was none other than number 111, the Great Bear. Rather than draw the Great Bear in GWR livery like they would have worn on the mainland, I've decided to put them into northwestern green livery like they're seen wearing in the illustration. The engine didn't perform too well and didn't have the best attitude either. The Great Bear was fairly cocky about being the first British Pacific locomotive, and their status as Top Link Express locomotive back home. They claimed that they were only allowed on the Paddington to Bristol main line because none of the other lines were worthy of such a prestigious engine. They were soon put in their place when they buckled the track during their trial run from Vickerstown to Tidmouth. Sodor's main line had to be repaired and strengthened, which put further financial strain on the North Western Railway. As a punishment for being cocky, the fat director decided that the Great Bear wouldn't pull trains during the day and would be relegated to mail services during the night. After one hot axle box too many, however, the fat director had had enough. The frustration that old Ursa Major was causing him was just too much. The Great Bear was sent back to Swindon Works and was promptly rebuilt into Castle-class locomotive Viscount Churchill. Meanwhile, the fat director became all the more wary of big engines. They always seemed to go wrong. But on the plus side, Stanier now owed the fat controller a favour after his little blunder, which would come in rather handy some 12 years down the line. With all that said, this is what the original illustration looked like, and here is my finished drawing. This engine appears in the background during an illustration from Thomas and the Trucks. At a glance you may be forgiven for thinking this was Gordon, but upon closer inspection it appears to be an 060 with a cut-out section of the cab and no side windows. Whilst it's difficult to pinpoint an exact likeness for such a small image, I'd say a lot of the details line up with the Great Northern Railway J22 class, aka the LNER J6. There is another illustration of an unknown engine in Thomas's book. In Thomas and Gordon, when Thomas is having trouble waking up, we see an engine laughing in the shed. For the longest time I assumed this was meant to be Henry, but if we go back to the original unmodified illustrations by Alexander Reginald Payne, you'll notice that he still has a black funnel and round buffers, which is not consistent with how Payne draws Henry, and so I see no reason to believe that the laughing engine can't be the Mystery 060. Speaking of Henry, I've decided to draw Henry along with the Mystery engine. Given this is taking place around the time of Thomas's book, I've decided to depict Henry in his blue livery, complete with the copper cap chimney as per the original Payne illustrations. I prefer that look for Blue Henry since it sets him apart from Gordon. I thought I'd also showing him damaging his buffers, which explains why he was sometimes seen with rectangular buffers during his blue phase. This is my first time drawing Vickerstown Station and I've always liked how it looks. Reginald Payne's illustrations of the station have always stuck in my mind for being quite atmospheric and reminiscent of a real railway. John Kenny's illustrations evoked a similar feel in my opinion. Given the class of engine he is, it might be worth calling this engine J, or JJ maybe. Either way, he clearly doesn't give a monkeys about Henry's accident. He's probably the sort of engine who only gives others advice after the point where they need it, rather than doing anything to prevent these incidents in the first place. "Should I look where you're going, Henry?" That's probably what he sounds like. I ended up redoing Henry's face in an attempt to make him look less like Gordon. Gordon and Henry's faces are quite similar in the early illustrations, so it was harder than I expected, but I think I managed. Unfortunately, when working on this illustration I ended up drawing a large chunk of it without hitting the record button beforehand. So if you notice any weird cuts or footage that doesn't look quite right, then you know why. And so, here is the engine as he originally appears, and here is my interpretation. This engine appears in the first illustration of Gordon's whistle. I wouldn't be surprised if it was supposed to be Edward, but the dipped running board and large boiler would seem to be enough evidence that it isn't him. Henry's book takes place in 1935, so compared to the other mystery engines we've looked at, we have a larger selection of engines to choose from. More specifically, I can finally draw a post-grouping engine. Basically all I had to go off was an engine with a dipped running board, a front bogie and splashes. The engine appears to be blue in the illustration, so there's no point in using the livery to narrow things down since during the mid-30s there were no British standard gauge engines painted blue aside from maybe the odd industrial engines. Even the LNER A4s are painted grey at this point. My idea is that this engine was brought in to help out on the North Western Railway whilst Henry was away at Crewe being repaired. I decided to go with an engine that was relatively modern at the time and could do the sorts of jobs that Henry did, which at this point would have been stopping passenger services with some goods trains here and there, plus the Flying Kipper of course. In the end I went with an LNER B17. These were primarily built for passenger services on the former Great Eastern lines, but were capable of hauling goods trains as well. I quite like the design of the B17, and I definitely think it's a shame that none of them were preserved. This isn't the first time I've drawn a blue B17. Several years ago I did a drawing of one in a hypothetical LNER blue livery, matching the colour scheme the railway used for station signs and road vehicles. Like I said before, During this point in the timeline, no mainland engine would have worn blue, so Sandra, as I've decided to call her, has presumably been painted into northwestern blue to make her feel more like part of the engine family during her stay. After emerging from Crovan's Gate in her new blue livery, she continues her journey to Tidmouth Sheds, passing Henry on her way. Henry's been lifted onto a flatbed truck and put on a siding, waiting to be shunted onto the next goods train bound for Crewe. "Take good care of the kipper while I'm gone," is presumably what he's saying. Some of the other engines are a little apprehensive when Sandra arrives at the big station. First, Henry doesn't return after his run with the flying kipper, and now another engine comes waltzing onto their railway. A rumour starts spreading that Sandra has taken Henry's place on the railway, which makes her feel quite unwelcome. Thankfully, before any real harm can be done, the Fat Controller is able to explain to his engines what has happened, assuring everyone that Henry is away for repairs and will be coming home eventually. Sandra soon makes friends with the other engines and proves to be a very capable addition to the team. Of course, all the engines are happy when Henry returns from Crewe, but there's a slight bittersweetness as Sandra has to return to her own railway. Her appearance in Gordon's Whistle presumably depicts her setting off for home. With that said and done, here's how the engine appears in the illustration, and here's my take. And there you have it, 3 more background engines as drawn and described by yours truly. Did you have a favourite? Are there any of these engines you'd like to see more of sometime? Be sure to comment down below and subscribe for more.